I'm Gold Derby editor Daniel Montgomery here with the creative team from Lessons in Chemistry, the Apple TV Plus limited series starring Brie Larson as a chemist who battles sexism in the science community, but then hosts an empowering cooking show with science at its core. I'm joined today by editor Geraud Brisson, hair department head Teressa Hill, cinematographer Jason Oldak, composer Carlos Rafael Rivera, supervising sound editor Perry Robertson, and production designer Kat Smith. I'll start with a question for everybody. The series is based on a novel by Bonnie Garmus. To what extent did you draw inspiration from the book, or did you focus really just on the scripts that you were getting for the show? Let's start with Geraud.
Oh, maybe we should start with the people who were on the show before me. I can go ahead.
Perfect. Who started on the show first?
Kat probably started first.
I would say that I can't resist any kind of research before I start. And so, of course, I read the book. But I do try to limit myself to what's on the page. And there were a few things that changed a little bit as we went along. So there's that. But it's kind of a sweet story and very entertaining. I did try to bring a little of that spirit to the design of it.
I did not read the book before we started shooting. I felt like if there was differences with what in the direction the writers went in, I kind of didn't want to get confused. I have read the book since we wrapped, but I kind of focused specifically more on the scripts and Kat and all of our collaboration as we went into pre-production.
Geraud, how about you?
We were three editors on the show originally. It was Matthew Barbero and Laura Zampel, and they were hired before me, and I was hired a little close to starting the shoot starting. So I didn't actually read the book before then either, probably for the same reasons that I felt I didn't want also to have other ideas that were not in the script in my head, especially at the beginning, especially with the first part of it, trying to find the voice of the show in the editing room. I know during production and pre-production, they've done the same work, but for us as well, I think we felt we needed to find the voice that the footage was guiding us to find, basically.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's basically what with hair and makeup, I think, collaborating with Mio Suzuki, the department head in makeup, also with costume, our costume designer, Miriam. It's basically for us in the hair department, and for me, helping to design the look of the show, working very closely with wardrobe and makeup, primarily wardrobe, because we as hair complete the silhouette of the design, and a wardrobe, the costume designer generally has an idea of having spoken with and collaborated with other departments, figuring out, the colors, the color palettes for each one of the actors and their wardrobe. For us, then we meet, and then that helps us to decide on hair color, etc. And I think that reading the book prior to any show that I start, unless of course I accidentally had read it, before, which I did not, is not necessarily a great idea for me as an artist. I like to pretty much stick with the script, so I don't deter from that storyline. And I actually build upon what the writers and the producers and the directors actually want. So for us, I think it was best that we just stuck to the scripts.
Hi, I'm Perry, and I do post-production sound, so I do everything after everybody else gets done with it. I usually just take what these guys have all put on screen and do the magic. And on this one, it was more about dialogue than anything. I mean, obviously, you had to have the period correct shoes, the period correct cars, things of that nature, but you know, it's the dialogue on this show was so amazing, and I love the story and so much. So we, except for a few little places, you know, tried to stay out of the way and just make sure you felt like you were in that time period. But yeah, mine was just reacting a lot to what everybody else has done, whether it's costumes or music or, of course, the editing, you know, and just and the production design and everything. We love to just watch and try to their make their jobs sound better.
You know what's amazing? I think this is kind of like, it sounds like all matter of fact, but the fact is the hang I'm in right now is pretty mighty, and I'm just off the cuff quickly thinking of Perry working on stuff since like Born Identity, or Teresa going back to Planet of the Apes like in 2000 or whatever. Like the legacy of the folks here does not suck, and it's always like one of those things that I have to pinch myself, because you know, we are very talking about this as it's sort of like, but the task at hand, which is the truth at the end of the day, there's a very hard deadline, and we have to do the thing we have to do, and make sure we keep our jobs, you know, and really make the showrunners happy. But it is kind of, I'm very much with Kat on the approach of writing as research. I teach that to my students. I think when I'm going to get on a project, I do all the research I can. I read the novel, and it was a quick read. I'm a fan of the changes they made, and I do think they kind of took on storytelling. Adapting novels to the visual medium is a very difficult thing, and I think they did a fantastic job, first of all. And then second of all, really trying to tell the story, and the music reflecting really the journey of a character was sort of what became my focus. And the character of Elizabeth Zott is someone whose life took very unexpected turns, and I found a universal component in that was really strong, that I realized most everybody, even in these boxes right now that we're in, has had a very unique life. What led us to have this moment in this conversation is always a unique thing, and Elizabeth Zott's story is no different. So melodically and musically, I wanted to write something that would kind of reflect that in a way.
The series is a period piece, of course, so a lot of work goes into placing us into that particular setting and time, mostly the 1950s and 60s in this case. What kind of research and references were you using, and what were some of the challenges that you faced going into it?
I was just going to say, you know, it's actually for hair and makeup. I think, as everybody knows, it's like living in each decade. It's completely different. The shapes are completely different. Speaking for wardrobe as well, the shapes that we create on set actually help to tell the story. So if you were to, an example would be, if you were to put a 1960s hairstyle in 1920, it would not work. You know, the shapes are so important, and the styles are so important. And as well, you have to research the economic status of a character. You have to take into consideration you know, the storyline as well. Like with Elizabeth Zott, you know, she was definitely not a woman who cared about her looks when we first meet her. And so that was very difficult for me because letting her hair go and be a little messy, whereas most women that lived in the 50s went to the beauty salon, you know, once a week, and they slept with rollers or their hair pin curled. And we're very put together every day, hair, makeup, wardrobe. And for her, it was a bit different. So that in itself was rather difficult. It was rather difficult for me to step away from the hair. Everybody had to wear wigs. We had a lot of, almost every actor that you see on screen has a wig on. And several of our main characters had to have multiple wigs, because we did live from the 1920s through the 1960s. And we visited every decade, living primarily in the 50s though. And we had to break that down. So we actually helped tell the story, you know, early 50s, mid 50s, late 50s. So it was definitely a challenge that the hair department enjoyed doing, but it was a lot of work, a lot of work.
So I would say that the research that I do for a period show is a little bit different than that because um, period design is not that specific for every period. So when you look at design from the 50s, you're really also looking at design from the 40s, the 30s, people around, if you think about your house, for instance, you can pinpoint the decade of all the, hopefully, of all the pieces you have in it. And they're not universally new. They're different decades. You've gotten it from different people, maybe from your mom or whatever. And so what I try to do is think about the character and what references that person might have to the design and how important design is in their life. And so for me, the character, let's say, of Calvin, the apartment that he's in may never have come up to the 50s because it would have been something that maybe he bought furnished or maybe he had somebody furnish, but he's been there for, at least 5 years. And so we're really talking about 40s design when you think about that. Plus, usually the trends of that particular decade don't really show up until the middle of the decade. So it's an interesting conundrum when you're doing period design in that it's everything before that period. But it's tricky because in this particular case, we were talking about science as well in that decade. And so you have to look at research for what science looked like, what the technology of science looked like. In a lot of ways, of course, they do have old technology because nothing has replaced it yet. But then the last part of that is actually finding those items and putting them on the set and recreating certain things to look realistic to the decade. And so it's really just like this great scavenger hunt of like the, putting together all of these elements and having this sort of beautiful piece in the end. It's really amazing. And I did have a great collaboration with Jason, as well as the about like lighting for television, lighting and cameras for television in the 1950s. But I bet you he has a little more to say about that.
Well, I was going to say, I think Zach Galler and we were shared cinematography roles. I think our inspiration was in what Teresa and Kat and what Mirren gave us in front of our cameras. I think the goal of this show was not to overly stylize a period look, at least from a camera and photography standpoint. It's really to be more subtle. With our LUT, it was inspired by this AGFA film stock look, which was a little warmer and had cooler pops here and there. But I think a lot of my inspiration is the collaboration that we all had to create the colors in front of the camera. It truly was magical. And so many times I've heard people talk about the show. They're like, I don't know what you did, but it just feels like it works. Like it doesn't feel overly this or that. I think in terms of lighting, we really tried to go with a very naturalistic feel. The practicals the Cat put in our frame is what we really tried to strive for in where our sources are coming from. I know the term naturalism is used a lot, but I feel like it was quite successful in this show.
But we also collaborated on what was like in the set for the TV show, like the lighting above them and, even like the green beds that we had put in.
Correct.
So that it also looked like it all belonged to that period. And there's a lot of difference between the way we shoot things today and what they did back then.
That's right. So our
that's
gaffer,
always interesting to see.
Our gaffer, Len Levine, he did like a ton of research about what lights were rigged up there. And because of what we use right now, we used all LED lights on this show. But when you look at a wide shot of Separate Six, It's a bunch of old tungsten Mole Richardson lights. And so we worked with the props department and with our lighting company to basically give us shells of a lot of those units, and we put LED lights inside of them so that it worked within Kat's design. The green beds worked. I want to give Len props because a lot of that specific design was his mastermind. And it was beautiful, and it kept the stage cool. It allowed Bree to have lights right above her and not be sweating like they would have back in the day.
Well, also, I think that Zach was pretty useful in collaborating with Jody, the prop master, and getting like
Right.
those cameras and getting them to actually be working.
That's right.
And so
Yes.
you could see an image. I have a couple of pictures of the set where you see a black and white image through the viewfinder.
A big thing that we didn't want to do is try and shoot images. If we were to shoot the show, is to not shoot it with our Arri cameras and then degrade it after, but to find more of an image that felt more appropriate to what post could have now. So we found these Ikegami cameras, and we used them when we were shooting Bree for the edit. And then if we were looking at the monitors behind the camera operators, we had these lipstick cameras that went in the props cameras that Jody was using. And yeah, props to Zach for that.
I mean, this show was so much fun.
Yeah.
Every time I talk about it, it brings back that moment and thinking of those kinds of details.
Yeah.
I think
And
that's
so much work. And so much
Yeah.
work. It was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a lot of
Yeah.
work.
And I have to say thank you to the DPs, both of them, for helping me out. I swear it was like either myself or my assistant department head, Carol Mitchell. We were like glued to their sides. I mean, sometimes we were like, out of the way. Because I was like, always like looking, because the lighting is so important when you're working with lace wigs. So
Yeah.
important. So important.
Well, coming from the post, like I said, the post side for me, Carlos and Geraud, I didn't see any goof ups. And then, we watch it over and over and over. And the fact that everybody had a wig on is astounding to me. I mean, it's crazy. But you guys just did an amazing job on all of that stuff. And for us personally, it makes it such an easy project to, I'm not gonna say easy, no project's easy, but it makes it much more fun and enjoyable when the content for us, when it gets to us and it's so good. Then all we can do is, we can just polish it, because as we all know, when you get a project that's not so good, you can't polish it enough, and there's nothing you can do to fix it. There's nothing you can do to make it better. But from the story through sets, the hair, the makeup, the photography, everything, and then, getting to put it together after Carlos's music comes in and Geraud and Laura and everybody get done cutting it. I mean, I know it sounds like a love fest, but it was such a great thing. And then I got to work with Bree on ADR, and all the actors, they would come in, and there was absolutely no airs of arrogance or anything. I mean, they came in and they loved each other, they enjoyed each other, and they were happy to see each other again. It wasn't, everybody always stayed longer than they needed to, if anybody needed any help. And it was, sorry, all my phones are going crazy. But it was a great thing. And, for me, I forgot what the original question was, but it was,
I was just wondering what like how does the period, like how did you develop that sense of period?
Well, for me, unfortunately, I'm almost old enough to have lived back then. Like my my grandparents had those cars, and all of those utensils and all the stuff in the kitchen they had. I know what those sounds like. So from my childhood, and so for me, it was pretty easy. And I just, we find what these beautiful people have put in the show, and you go, oh, I remember what that sounds like, and you go looking for it. It's so much more interesting to do that kind of sound than now with an electric car and a silent phone and
Yeah, I think
whatever.
there's something to be said for like when you do a period piece, whether it's set design, lighting, anything, music, whatever it is, hair, makeup, wardrobe. I truly believe that when the audience is watching the finished product, the production that we've all worked so hard on, when nobody's distracted by any of that, and they're actually transported and taken along a journey, and nobody's going, oh, look at the hair, or look at the this, or look at that, or the lighting's this, or the music's that, or whatever. And it's just, that's the one thing when I watch lessons in chemistry for myself, which I'm my own worst critic, but I really enjoyed, I was taken on a journey. I was actually brought into those periods that we visited, and nothing was like standing out to where it distracted me. I've seen a lot of period movies, as we all have, and sometimes it's distracting when colors, lighting, hair, wardrobe, makeup, whatever it is, props, if they're really just like coming at you, it can be distracting, and I think,
Everything was working. Everything was working.
yeah,
It's
agreed.
very smooth and subtle, and the show just works as a whole. You
Yeah.
can feel it.
I was gonna say, for us in the cutting room, there's a lot of the story was mapped out, and the continuity was mapped out by everybody ahead of us in the dialogue, the way people spoke, in the design, in the way all the work that has been done on set. Therefore, there was also every script kind of play with time. There's a lot of time period intercutted with other time periods, and also a lot of montage was scripted. Most of them were actually scripted. But there was room to adjust, but we had to be careful about what we borrowed, because we couldn't necessarily borrow from anywhere eventually because of those time periods and the story carrying on from the 50s to, what is it, 60 something, 50, yeah.
Yeah.
51 or something, yeah. So we had to be careful about those little details that were already put in before us, and then not, even though keeping a freedom. And we have, from one episode to another, we have sometimes swapped scenes. We experimented, not me, but I was given the note to sometimes let the scene, take a scene from episode 5 and put it in episode 4, or give a scene from episode 8 and give it to episode 7. And those things, we had to make it look like it was completely seamless, no matter what. So we were paying attention to those details that were putting before us. And the last, also, where we trusted, that Perry and everything, and all his team will put the right sound in it. But also we had a music supervisor, Christine Rowe, who helped a lot with the music we could use, and that was very specific, the music we use at certain time period. We were very careful about not crossing, if we were in 51 or 52, we're not going to use something that was in 53.
Yeah, she was great about that too. She would call it out straight up. She's that's anachronistic or whatever. I was gonna ask you something, Geraud, just come to mind. Did you have the room to have conversations about, like, let's cut in the style of the editing style of the time? Was that ever a conversation that was had or was able to be had?
Not really, no. We didn't actually talk about that style. Part of it was trying to find the emotions, and not really being, not being tied to style, but more to find a way that was not going to get in the way of emotion, in the way of those characters. And that was mostly what what our guidance was,
Yeah, and just to speak about music quickly, because I think, to move on to the next question as well. But I do think, like, music really was about the character, and maybe vibraphone was one of the elements that I used to kind of put us in place, or, in time, if anything. But one of the thoughts I had originally also was to make it more jazzy, but the fact that Calvin loved jazz and it was so prevalent to his character, it felt like it would be competing in a way for the way it's placed right now. Like the music that we hear against Calvin is stuff Christine got and pulled from. And so really it was more about the emotional arc of the characters that we were really focused on, and I really wanted to make sure that the music was reflecting. So yeah, I think that's
the music in the opening credits is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Love it. It's just, it's, I love it. It's so unique. And it's like when it comes on, you know, when it starts, it grabs your attention, draws you in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, mine plays for the main title is in the 8th episode, in the final episode. It felt like the appropriate time to kind of do that, but it was something that Christine had found. I don't even know who made that call on finding the song that plays in the other episodes that I think is fantastic as well. So I just don't know
Carlos, whose decision was it to switch it up for episode 8 for the opening?
That was Lee. I think there was a conversation, and Geraud, maybe you're aware of this process, but there was a bid for it. There was a main title that was being made, and I wrote it and I submitted it. And I think they were going for the song most of the time. And then Lee, it just, the scene that led into it it made perfect sense. Geraud, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I was there when it happened, because it was a discussion about the song with Lee. Lee was, we were working together on the last episode at the time that it was a discussion, and I was still working on episode 3, which was an episode with 630. And
yes,
it was explored, the score was explored again then, because Lee was worried about the switch of tone in episode 3, going from the accident and 630 running away from the accident, and then cutting to the song, which was a complete different tone. And we talked about it. We came to the conclusion that actually it helped to be a little bit more light and some levity added in the credits, so you could reset the slate and to start again with this. And after the credit in this episode, we go to Elizabeth, and that's kind of helped going back to Elizabeth that way. But
that's
then,
a great call, though. That's a
then
really
when we
cool
were
call, yeah.
Because they were talking about the score, and I was working, and we worked a lot with Bree, with Michael Costigan, and Natalie, Sandy, and Lee were in the room for the beginning of 108, and we changed that a few times, and we brought it closer to the story of Calvin. And because we were there, I was like, well, I'm going to try your score, because it is the one time where you don't want to disconnect almost and cut to something completely different. And it was also in the story, it felt like it was right, because we were talking about putting all those, linking all those dots together finally about how we'll get there. So.
Well, I owe you a bottle of something, man. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. The fact that the music was there helped to get the idea, believe me.
Yeah, no, I'm super happy about it. No, it's very cool. Thank you, man.
Oh, it's not just me, but yeah.
Yeah. I'll text Lee maybe and see if he answers back. I don't know. Anyway.
On any production, of course, there are, challenges that you must go through, things that you have to, maybe overcome. Was there anything in particular that you're especially proud of in terms of, a challenge or a setback or something that particularly came up that you were able to find creative ways to deal with? We could start with Teressa.
Me? So that's great. That's a great question. There were a lot of challenges for us in the hair department on this one. That's for sure. And I think that some of our biggest challenges that we faced were casts not, our cast members, our actors not being cast yet. And, flying in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They had to go through the COVID testing. Once they were cleared, then they'd go to wardrobe. And we would see them at about 7 p.m. And for instance, like some of our male actors couldn't cut their hair, and their hair was quite long, like to their shoulders. And they were doing like maybe a 1920s scene. And so we had to wig them. And we didn't get them until 7 o'clock sitting in a chair, and that wig worked first step in the morning, and we had to be off the clock by 10. So we were faced with those types of situations a lot on this. So what do? You do what you need to do to get the job done, right? So we work together as a department, and we sometimes worked until the wee hours of the morning, and we were there, and the wig and the actor were on set first up. So we dealt with a lot of those types of situations, as well as like shooting different, I mean, all of us, everybody on the crew were also dealing in their own departments with trying to make it all happen, meaning shooting several different decades, for instance, in a day. And for us, switching the hair over, having to have a whole set of wigs over here that are set, backgrounds on set, they're shooting it, the actors are on set, they're shooting it, and then we have like however long it takes for the DPs, the light, the grips, and electricians and everybody to switch everything over, or sets to be switched. We had very little time to get everybody switched into their wardrobe and makeup to make their adjustments, and for us to apply wigs to then help create that particular decade that we would be shooting. So it was, time was not necessarily always on our side. So those were our challenges, some of our challenges that we faced.
One challenge that was difficult was the grocery store for 1950s. We scouted a lot of stores to see which one could potentially be turned over into a 1950s grocery store. And a lot of them, I'm a native Los Angeliner, and I feel like if you ask me, for the perfect location of 1950s ballroom or restaurant or whatever, I'm pretty good at figuring out a good spot to do that. But this was especially hard because I don't think there are any grocery stores that still have the elements of that period. And then if they do have the elements, you have to completely take out all of the product because it's changed so much since then. The packaging, the design. And so we looked at some markets, and we came upon this like little, well, not little, but sort of medium-sized kind of general store. And we were very specific about what we were going to change over and what was going to not be dressed. But some of the things you wouldn't necessarily believe would be problems are things like refrigeration units that have like soda cans in them. Even though they did have refrigerators, obviously, they didn't have like the display ones that are kind of ubiquitous everywhere. And so we had to go in and cover that immediately. And then, of course, the produce section, all the signage is different. It's kind of like this thread that you pull from a sweater, and you are just, the work is just compounding on itself. I think it took us 3 days to dress that, and probably took like an assembly line of set decorators 2 to 3 weeks to fake all the packaging. But it came off pretty well. I mean, I liked the way it looked in the long run.
Yeah, it was excellent. Your work was beautiful.
Thank you.
I think one of the most challenging days in my 2 blocks was all the rowing that we did in our last block in episodes 7 and 8. We basically we had a lot of rowing in 7, a little bit of stuff in 8, and then stuff on the shore. And then we also had some work from episode 5 that, because of TV schedules, like, let's put it all in one day. But we're shooting in December, so the sun sets at 4:15. And so it was just heavily planned, as much as you can be, being on the water with Tara, our director, and Katie, our first AD, and myself. And, we always tried to keep our camera in the right place where the sun was. And it's super successful. I'm very happy with the outcome, but it was, just watching the sun go through the sky, and it's like, oh, we still have this and this and this to do. It was a lot of stuff. I want to bring one other thing up that involved Kat, which was super fun, and I'm super excited with how it came out. But in episode 4, we had to create a passage of time in the kitchen, and our directors Bert and Bertie came up with this idea that Elizabeth is recreating her kitchen to turn it into her science lab. How do we do that? And we essentially figured out, with a couple of different cuts. Geraud, did you cut that episode?
I did, yeah.
You did, yeah. So with a couple of different cuts, where time is passing, and then at one point it ends with her and a vision of Calvin. And, Kat, you could speak a little more about the planning that you were doing, but we had to break it up into a whole week's worth of shooting, because we shot this block and then the art department would change this part of the kitchen over. And it was, it's awesome the way it came out, but it was quite an ordeal.
Yes, I mean, that took a lot of planning and with the directors, and I had figured out early on before they came on that we would have to remodel the kitchen for that scene. They had written that scene ahead of time. And so I built the counters so that they were removable, so that we could it started with like a tile kitchen, and then eventually went to like a stainless steel countertop. And so we just picked that all up as a piece and then put in the stainless. That was kind of the easiest part. But then Bert and Bertie had this idea of kind of doing it as sort of a progressive long shot in a way. And so that, of course, made it very complicated. And then you're like trying to figure out ways to make a change so that you see it for the next cut, and that the progression is very uniform and steady, continuous. So that's different than like just getting a kitchen and having a couple of days to turn it into some different decorated kitchen, than to basically do it all on camera or as the camera's waiting. But I thought it was really great. I loved it.
Oh, it's great. We had to figure out where things would swipe our lens or something to then cut into this other angle. It's very cool. Very happy with it. But the whole show is challenging.
Yeah.
I am very happy with the show, but it was a challenging show in a good way, in a great way.
Yeah.
Block shooting doesn't make anything easy, really. I mean, when you've got 8 episodes and you're block shooting, and then you're having to go back while you're block shooting to go back to another episode and pick up something from that block, and you're all over the map sometimes, trying to finish things up, clean things up, reshoot things, whatever it may be, right? I mean, for any of our departments.
Well, and the biggest thing for, I'm sure all of you guys, but for us was just COVID, dealing with COVID. I got to give so many props to the engineers around town, because I don't know if you guys have been around or not, but we would do all our loop groups over Zoom, because we couldn't get that many people in a studio or something like that. And it was just, the engineers were running, every single person had a different timing and all this kind of stuff. It was amazing to me to see the engineering marvels that came out of that painfully bad time in our lives. But anyway, that's my big props on this show.
Yeah, COVID didn't make it easy for anybody, really. I mean, there was a lot of times too, like the morning of, an actor would maybe test positive and they couldn't show, and we had to do like but immediately like make somebody into somebody else, basically recreate that character somehow so they could actually photo double. And those things were actually put on us too, you know what I mean, along with the other scheduling, struggles or challenges that we were faced with on a daily basis. It was, sometimes it's like people think, I could be wrong, but most they think that hair, we just have a comb and a brush and a blow dryer. You know what I mean? And that's it. But there's a lot more involved in it. And it's when you have situations like that happen, or you've got a crew member, you know, somebody in your department that isn't able to show up for work. It's like, and then you have to fill that spot. So it's challenging for sure.
It is as seamless as everybody else's work and what they talked about. But the last montage of the show, when Elizabeth is reading Great Expectation, and there's this montage going into the dinner that she has with everybody else. This montage was somewhat scripted, and we actually, in the original version, we saw who was getting chosen to present Dinner at 6, the next person. But looking at it, we figured out we was kind of missing the point of the montage, which was about those connection. And how do we make it feel like it's about connection and not about a single person or about a single relationship? And that was hopefully successful. But that was kind of the challenge for me and for us in this last moment of the show, to make it feel and to go back to and choosing. I had 8 episodes of footage I could choose from to kind of best illustrate that this journey was about the connection and the relationship and how they build and how they create an existence, and how, since chance has a part in it, and in some way you can read it as you can read things in those connections, but some of them are completely random as well and just as valid.
Yeah, on that note, that scene, I remember Tara and I, we wanted to showcase all of the people in her house, and it was like, how do we do that? How do we create this sort of tying everyone together? And so we basically came up with 1 or 2 shots to bring you through, to really feel like the audience is the POV. But it was like, then where do I put the lights? And so it was very challenging. That was also quite a success, but challenging in how we move through that house and see everybody.
Landing on Calvin was
that was such
man, that was like I know. And the song was perfect. It was like that was a great way to end the story. So I was very happy. But anyway,
beautiful shot.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me today and for talking about the show. It's been it was certainly a successful effort from all of you. It's had a very successful run at the Guild Awards this past season, and knock on wood at the Emmy Awards coming up. So thank you all for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good seeing everyone.
Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Have a great day.